Good evening, everybody, and I want to welcome you to our fifth day of the online protest. We have 2 more days, and we'll be sharing with you at the end who will be joining us on day 6 and 7. As we all know, peaceful protests are continuing in our streets across these United States of America, and we want to continue to commend all of those that are gathered in the streets, mostly young people of all different races and ethnicities and religions and genders and sex orientations. They are marching together to stand up for true justice and equity. And so we want to commend them for keeping the pressure on. And as they do that, we are joining them in tandem online with our nonviolent protest. And so I want to bring you up to speed on some things in case you've missed the news. Sometimes I miss the news and things are happening. As you know, there was a memorial service today that the family held in, I believe it was either North Carolina or South Carolina. Secondly, there have been many mayors who have stepped up to the plate to sign the pledge to have their police policies and practices evaluated. President Obama made that request, and many of them have stepped up to the plate to accept that challenge. Tuesday in the state of Georgia, if you're from Georgia, we have our primary election, and we're encouraging everyone who did not vote by absentee ballot or did not do early voting to show up at the polls on June the 9th. We also want to keep your attention on the anti-lynching legislation. One person, Rand Paul, held it up, but we want to make sure that that legislation is ultimately passed in the Senate. And then finally, we want to encourage you to sign our petition about banning the chokehold. We're going to be encouraging you to reach out to your senators and your congresspersons to bring up the legislation on banning chokeholds all across this nation. We know that Minneapolis has already taken the lead. And speaking of Minneapolis, a few days ago, I believe a couple of days ago, the council president said that it's the goal to abolish the city's police department for a transformative new model of public safety. Wow. I want to ask Bernice Hampton-Smith to join me now. She's been co-hosting with me these last 4 days, and now the 5th day. Welcome, Bernice Hampton-Smith. She's producer of our beloved Community Talks. Did you hear what I just said, that the city council president has made a commitment to abolish, well, that's the aim of the city council president, to abolish the city's police department for a more transformative new model of public safety. We're going to have to keep our eyes on
Yes.
The change may come out of Minneapolis, and others hopefully will follow, because if we don't have new transformative models in this country, then we would have failed all of those whose lives were senselessly lost.
Absolutely.
And so tonight, though, we're going to have some really important conversations. We've had many
very important conversations.
Yeah, we've had many the night before, but if I might be frank, both of us are ministers of the gospel. And one of the things that often burns my heart is when I don't see a strong presence of the church at the forefront of these social justice movements, because my father and 99 other pastors founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1957, February 14th, Valentine's Day, to combat segregation in the South. I want you to hear that. 100 ministers collectively came together as a force to combat segregation in the South. And we know we ended up with civil rights legislation as a result, voting rights legislation as a result. And so tonight, we're going to have 3 pastors, one of whom actually worked with my father, Reverend Otis Moss Jr. He was a part of the SELC that my father founded. He worked with my father, I believe, from 61, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, until my father was taken from us by assassin's bullet. And he was a regional director at SCLC, leading campaigns to fight against segregation and discrimination. So he has experience coming out of the movement. Former pastor of the Olivet Institutional Baptist Church in Cleveland, Ohio, and a theologian, a very profound speaker, author, and activist. And so we want to have him join us now, Reverend Dr. Otis Moss Jr. We also have joining us tonight Pastor Jensen Franklin. Pastor Franklin is the pastor of evangelical pastor, which I think is important for you all to hear, because on this platform, we try to be a bridge and bring people together, because this is a human rights issue. These are human rights issues that we are talking about. Humanitarian issues. And so Pastor Jensen Franklin, evangelical pastor, he's the senior pastor of Free Chapel Church, a multi-site church based here in Atlanta, in the Gainesville, Georgia area, author of Right People, Right Place, Right Plan. Jensen has joined us now. Is Dr. Moss and John going to join us as well? Bonita? Are the other pastors joining us as well?
No, Pastor Franklin's the first 10 minutes, remember. We're going to do, he has to go. He's actually protesting tonight. So we're going to, yeah, he's protesting tonight. So we're going to have Pastor Franklin.
Tell them, don't have you disappear. You have to be a part of our conversation.
I'm here as long as you need me.
So Pastor Franklin, first of all, thank you for joining us on tonight. You called me a few days ago. I've known you for, probably over 21 or so years now. And I've known your ministry and your calling. I know you have a heart after Christ. And you said, what can I do? Because I want to give my life and my heart to these issues of justice. And we know that one of the strongholds historically when it comes to social justice issues has been the white church. Frankly, during my father's time, it was the white church who oftentimes was complicit through history and segregation, all the way, in slavery, all the way down to segregation. Sometimes the white church was complicit in it, and other times they were just silently sat by with fear. And now we're at this moment in 2020 with the senseless killing of George Floyd. And something has happened inside of many of the hearts and minds of white pastors and white people that I've never seen before. And I'd like you to share some of that with me, because there does seem to be a shift, even though many of us have been saying all along, please come and be with us in these fights for social justice. So tell me what that is that you believe has been that shift that occurred.
Well, I was thinking before we came on here, the way I met you was you came to me. I was preaching. I don't even know if you remember it. You're an extremely busy person, but I was preaching in South Atlanta for a black pastor there, and he was a mutual friend. And you came that night, and afterwards we met for the first time, and I was moved. You shared some stories that I'll never forget about your dad, just stories I'd never heard. And it touched me, it moved me. And our church, just to tell you a little bit about us, is our church is in Gainesville. I've been here for almost 30 years. When I came here, there was not an integrated church in all of Hall County, not one. I would say today that Free Chapel is probably, I believe I can make this a factual statement, the most integrated church in the state of Georgia when it comes to our multicultural congregation. And that has not been by accident. That has been by understanding, listening, living with people who come from different lives and different experiences in this nation. And so with that said, it has come to a place. I do believe this is different. It just feels different. I believe that no longer can white pastors just be silent. No longer can they see something happen like we have seen, the horrendous murders and deaths that we've seen just in the last few weeks. Not only George Floyd, but right here in the state of Georgia. Ahmaud was run down, chased down, and killed, shot dead on the streets. And the blood is cried up. And I think the black community was saying, like on a cell phone, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Every time something would happen. And I think finally, there is a real understanding from, and a lot of us older white guys have been listening, I think, and living what we preach. But I also think that a lot have not, because it's not their world. There's no sensitivity. They have no acquaintances other than what they're like, and that's white, and that's the church world kind of people. And unfortunately, I'm just talking honest, and I think this time is different. This time it feels like that there is a real awakening, especially in the pulpit. And what you said about your father calling the 100 ministers, that's my dream, is to, I can use my influence with white pastors and challenge them that every time something like this happens, you cannot be silent, especially if you have an all-white church. I mean, I had one pastor tell me, well, I don't have any black people in my church. And I'm like, that alone is the problem of what you don't understand, that your voice is the voice to that community, and you cannot be silent on issues like this. So I see it breaking, I see a change, and I believe this millennial generation is refusing to be silent, and they're our children, and they're our grandchildren.
So let me ask you this, because it's one thing, I think, now to move to speaking, even within your congregation. I understand you had I don't know if it's what you defined it as, but with your congregation the other day, a discussion on racism and the church. And I think that has to happen within white churches. But how do we get white churches to move from praying to having praying feet? In other words, how do we get white pastors to join in some of these peaceful demonstrations? So that people understand you are really with us, and also use the influence in certain places that you all have access to. Many of you pastor people who are sitting in seats of power in corporate America, in Congress, in Senate, and you have their ear. How do we get you all to move in behalf of justice and equity?
I think it's right now doing what we're doing. Come, let us reason together. We don't have to agree on every issue, but if I can't stand and boldly proclaim that racism is sin, racism is evil, and racism is real in 2020, there is something bad wrong with me and wrong with any leader who cannot stand up and say that. And so I think it comes from this kind of dialogue. Being vulnerable, because a lot of times white pastors are afraid to say anything. They don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want. So, but that's no excuse anymore. You gotta get informed of the times in which you're living, and know the times, and know what we ought to do.
So I'm going to ask this hard question: how do I get white pastors to risk their lives in the comfort of their pulpit, like Jesus did, who was crucified? Because people are losing their lives in this struggle to equalize things. Because it's one thing to say it's wrong, it's another thing to work on those things that dismantle what is wrong in America.
I think the more white pastors like myself, who have influence with other white pastors, lead and model what you're talking about. And I'm not going to a march because I had this interview with you. I actually had that lined up before we had this interview. We just talked this week. But I'm going to a candle lighting, and I'm honored to be there and be one of the speakers there. But I think it just starts with us beginning to lead, in our own sphere of influence, and that includes social media, that includes posts, that includes television ministry if we have it, speaking up, not ignoring, not just preaching another sermon about the Bible and saying nothing about the current events that our whole nation is dealing with. And so it's using our voice, using our influence, using who we are and what we do to get in the streets and model and say to other ministers, almost put a little pressure out there actually to say, what's your problem? Because, it's time for change. We need legislation. We can't just keep talking either. We need legislative change.
And I know you have been, I believe, in support of the hate crime legislation here in the state of Georgia, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, you can, yes. And so we appreciate your support on that. And I'm just going to ask you to keep using your influence. And it's risky, but I think that's what we're called to as pastors. Jesus said, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross and follow me. And that's what we're called to do. And you did something risky the other day as we come to a close. It's no secret that you're a conservative. You have supported President Trump in terms of you voted for him. I think you're on his faith advisory team. Right. And the other day he said something like he always says things out of turn, but this just was the most insensitive thing that I've ever heard in my life. And you spoke about that. You didn't agree with President Trump's tweet about looting leading to shooting, and you called it very insensitive, and the need at this time for healing words. What moved you to do that? Because I always tell people, look, we're not going to all vote the same way, and people have a right to vote their conscience. But when we have leaders, regardless of whether they're Republican or Democrat, we have to hold them accountable when they do things that is more hurtful to the nation than is helpful to the nation.
That's right. Well, the reason that I did it, and it's not the first time that I've done it, I've done it on numerous occasions when he called Nigeria and Haiti a slang word. I stood in my pulpit on national television, said it was wrong. That's not correct. They're precious people. They're God's people. I've been to both of those nations, ministered in both of those nations, continue to minister in Haiti every month through our programs there. What the president said was absolutely the worst words at the worst time that he could have said. They were totally insensitive and disconnected from any kind of empathy and understanding of the black community and the pain, the absolute heartbreak that they were walking through. Not only the black community, but many of us who were deeply disturbed watching that. I don't know how any human being can watch that and say I'm okay with that. And so no, I don't agree. I don't agree with a lot of the things that you're never going to agree. It's always but I am thankful that I'm there. Your father said something one time that touched me, that I heard and I read. He said presence is everything. And if you're not at the table, and he was asked, why are you going to the White House and why are you meeting with racist people in the White House? This is what your father said. He said presence is everything, meaning I think I can make this interpretation that if I'm not at the table, I can't make any effective change. And so when we've spoke up for dreamers, and I have, when I was in a meeting, I was talking and I talked about the dreamers, and I talked about how that they have come up in our church and in our nation. I've known them all their life, and we've got to have a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. And the next thing I knew, I was taken into the Oval Office and sat down across the table, and I talked to the president for 10 minutes about the dreamers. And will he change? I don't know. Will he agree with some of the things that we proposed to him? I don't know. But I was thrilled that when President Obama was president, that great men of God like T.D. Jakes were at the table. I didn't want him to run when something bad happened or the president did something that I didn't agree with. I wanted him at that table because I understood that he would speak truth to that president. And every time I've met with him, and I can say this, there's more than me, there's others. And certainly, people say we're talking honestly, and that's what I love about what you do. Somebody says, well, he's just using you to get votes. Well, I would say back that we're using him because I am a pro-life person. I am a my faith, that's my core. I am a pro-justice. I am a pro-religious freedom. I just, it's so critical that we not lose our religious freedom. So there's things that we get, and you just have to work and give and take. And that's my prayer, Dr. Bernice, is that somehow, some way, as much as I know that the president has been offensive and the president has said things that can never be reconciled with the black community, but somehow right now, if we could just get some voices at the table and find some middle ground and find real legislation that could make a change in the Justice Department and the police way of just being so military and brutal versus understanding the community.
Well, I appreciate your sentiments. When we teach nonviolence, we talk about finding the win-win pathway because we do live in a diverse country. Everybody is not going to be 100% anything, but we do have to find that way. And so I appreciate your heart. I appreciate your commitment, and I'm just going to continue to encourage you to use your influence with other white pastors. They need to be challenged. All pastors, regardless of their racial background, need to be a part of dismantling systemic racism in America. I mean, we cannot continue to go forward with the same systems in place that we've had in place up until this day, literally. And we have to create more equity. I mean, blacks are still at the bottom in every category in America, and it's not because we're less than. And that's the white supremacist standard that we have to acknowledge. This country has seen black people as less than, and we have to apologize for seeing us that way. And then we have to go to work to look inside of our corporations, our churches, our companies, our industries, to see where our policies and practices are not lining up with equity and even the pay scale. People are not being paid on par as their white counterparts. Women are not being paid on par as men. These are things that we have to be intentional about, because this is what the generation you're talking about, your children, are crying out for. And I just recall the other day I was listening or watching a post. I think it was on Instagram. There was a white girl correcting her parents. About all of this. You saw it.
I did.
And I can imagine that's probably happening in many white households across this nation, because this time, different than my father's time, there were white supporters, there were Jewish supporters, there were Hispanic supporters during my father's movement. But this time, there are, many of the faces that we're seeing out there now are white young people.
And Bernice, can I just humbly suggest this to the audience, that when you see someone moving and shifting, maybe they haven't been there, maybe it's a colleague at work and stuff, and now you're seeing that shift, give grace to those people. Don't, I know that every time that I have posted something, there is this barrage of it. It's like you get shot at from every side, and that's fine. That's what we do. We understand that. But I would challenge and say, let's let this shift happen. Let's welcome. Let's enlarge the circle of love. Let's say, you don't have to agree with me on this, that, and the other. But if you are ready to stand and end racism in America, I can stand with you on this, and I can believe with you that this is God's battle, and He's going to win it when we come together.
Yes, and we stand together on our commitment to humanity at the end of the day. So thank you for joining us, Pastor Franklin, taking this time out. And if you would look at our petition, and if you can, sign it against the chokehold, because we've got to ban that in this nation. It's not an appropriate way to address the law and order, as you would say, and encourage others to do the same. So thank you again, and God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.
So I'm going to welcome back Bonita Hampton Smith. I don't know where my co-host disappeared to. I had a co-host and I ended up being one-on-one.
Well, you know what? That conversation was really good, and you didn't need any more seasoning in the pot. Yeah, it was really good.
Oh my God!
And go ahead. No, go ahead.
And you
no,
what?
No, I was just thinking, it was a great demonstration of, one of our principles that, nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. And when you are a pastor and you've supported a president and you have to speak out because humanity demands you speak out, that takes courage, because we know, unfortunately, sometimes President Trump will come right back at you, and it can create
annihilate you.
And we've seen other leaders speak out. We've seen the Secretary of the Pentagon and other generals who are speaking out. So I just enjoyed the conversation. And hey, my mother said, "Stay out her pot. It's seasoned pretty well." So you had seasoned that pot pretty well, and I just wanted to just say, hey, let me stand back and listen and take it all in. So, yeah.
All right. Well, we have a brother who we know. We were together at a church here in Atlanta.
Yes.
Pastor John Gray is going to join us now. He's senior pastor of the Relentless Church, former assistant pastor with Joel Osteen out in Houston, Texas. And John, I must say, I've seen you on IG doing your thing out there, leading and walking alongside and speaking life into those young people in Greenville, South Carolina, and going to Houston and joining all of those demonstrations and protests there. And I just want to thank you for your involvement in this movement, because really, frankly, there's been a sector in the Black church that has also stood on the sideline when we've had these social justice issues, because they didn't think there was an intersection. Right. And their role was just to be pastor in the pulpit and not understanding that Jesus spent most of his time outside of the temple. So just talk to us about where you are right now, how you feeling, because you have a son.
I do. First of all, to you, Bernice, I just want to give proper honor. Just allow me this moment to say thank you for the life that you live and your leadership and your consistent commitment to Black and brown people and underserved people, and always being a bridge builder. From the time I've known you when we served together to right now, you've been consistent in that. And I'm just grateful for your life. We need your voice, and I'm honored to be here. To Bonita as well, blessings on you. And I love the shimmy on the silver shirt, co-host shirt.
You see, I got a little shimmy, it's a little tiny shimmy.
I just need your background with that beautiful mirror,
No. This is my wife.
You're reflecting.
Got none of this. In the man cave, which is a brown wall. My wife was like, "You can't be on the in front of the world with that brown wall." So I'm in here with the pink curtains. But I'll never forget when things changed.
It's good to see you, though.
Good to see you as well. It changed for me when Trayvon Martin was killed, and we were driving in Houston. My wife started weeping, and I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "I'm raising a Black son." And it just hit me for the first time that it could be us. The death of our child because of a system that has devalued the humanity of Black boys and girls and Black and brown lives. And it was a shake and a shock to my system that was needed. And I'll tell you why. You just had Pastor Jensen Franklin on. Pastor Jensen officiated my wedding. I served as a pastor in his church in Gainesville, Georgia, which is not known.
That's right.
That's right.
It's still very much a challenging area. And back then, when I was there in 2006, even more so. And so I've always been running towards areas of building bridges, being the first Black guy or the Black pastor to step into some of these white circles. And I was always big on building bridges, and I was always welcomed. But, there's always this area where it's not all the way an interconnection and in integrating our lives. It's one thing to invite me to your church. It's another to invite me into your life. And I say that to say this. What I realized is that as much bridge building as I was doing, if I get pulled over by the cops, they don't see that. They don't know that guy. They don't know the guy that preaches at white churches or travels around the world speaking about reconciliation and unity. They don't see that. They see a big 6'3" black man, and they see, a threat. They don't see a husband or a father. They see the caricature of black manhood. And so my manhood is weaponized before you get to know who I am. Yeah. And so the reality, Bernice, is that I wasn't always as active as I could have been. But this is our Emmett Till moment. The casket is open. We watched him die. And what's crazy is when we saw Ahmaud Arbery, we were hurt, we were broken. But it's another thing to see somebody's life leave them while they cry for their mother. And you can't stay silent. What this did is it took our neutrality away. You can't be neutral on this because this is not color, this is justice. And justice is a theme across all of Scripture. And I've had conversations with Pastor Jensen because the truth is, if those of us who are in the faith community don't address systemic racism and injustice, right, the apathy and the silence of the white evangelical community, and the over-politicization of Jesus as this gun-toting Republican version of an American white man versus the Jesus of Scripture that you eloquently stated would be with the poor, the marginalized, the wine bibbers, the tax collectors, and the lepers, the prostitutes, right, the unsavory ones. And so Jesus, being a revolutionary, was killed because of how he valued humanity beyond the current political structures. And so you, of all people, know that an idea can get you killed because your father laid down his life for what he believed. And I'm at a place in my life that I have decided that this is a hill that I'm willing to die on. It's not a game to me. This is not an opportunity to me. This is my life. I got a black son I'm raising, and I've got a daughter that needs to see her father stand for something beyond just preaching in the pulpit. This is not a Jesus will fix it moment. This is a Jesus, give me the strength to stand up. And if nobody stands with me, let me stand anyway. Because right is right if no one is for it. Wrong is wrong if everyone is for it. What we have now is a collective conscious shifting in the direction of justice. And after 400 years, finally, since 1619, when the first 9 Africans got here in Jamestown, and not got here, brought here in chains. Yeah. Black and brown have been in chains in this country for 400 years. But I'm encouraged in Scripture that there was another people that was enslaved for 400 years. And in a moment, God turned it. And he shifted the entire history of a nation in one moment. And I believe that 2020 is the year of reckoning and reconciliation. But we also need to deal with the truth that the system that we're a part of is bigger than any one individual. So the legislation to get this chokehold repealed, that must go forward. But we also must be unapologetically Black and continue to say that Black lives matter. Now, coming from a man who has spent a majority of his life reaching out and extending olive branches to white pastors and white churches, it's very important for everyone to hear me say, Black lives matter. And then I'll hear the echo, well, all lives matter. That's like saying my house matters. And then someone says all houses matter. Yeah, but my house is on fire. Right. So your house is good. I need help if my house is burning down. And I think what you all represent and what this conversation represents is not just protest, but the next logical point, the progression, the evolution of protest is activism, to mobilize behind the moment. And you're just the leader to do it. And you're on Good Morning America. You're on all of these places. And it's because this is the moment where we're looking for centralized leadership. Last thing we need right now is manager. I don't need another manager. Don't play the middle. Get in the lead. Tell me which way, and tell me what we're standing for. Give me a centralized list of agenda items that we're fighting for. And I'm ready to lay this life down. Amen. One day we're going to see Jesus, and the way life is going, Matthew 24 is happening in our lifetime. But until he comes back, with whatever breath I've got left in these lungs, I'm going to scream for justice. Amen. And I'm going to fight until the system that has kept us from access to credit lines, still redlining in real estate, to have a small business loan, the stairs when we go into the store, all of the things that we still have to live with until it's all torn down. We cannot rest. We cannot rest.
That's right. That's right. So I'm just going to ask you this in closing, because well said.
Yes,
well said. Every word that you said.
Yeah.
How do we get our white brothers and sisters to take that breath with us, to get them to the place where you are? How do you get your white pastor friends to really get involved, not just in marching and demonstration? That's good. But as you said, the activism in dismantling things from a policy standpoint and also within their institutions. Because you can have a multicultural congregation, but your leadership is not diverse, and diverse in the sense of equity, not just people there, but they don't have any real say-so.
You better preach. I know this ain't church service, but what I'll say is white pastors.
Because this is a different moment.
Yes, it is.
What needs to be said to them?
The first thing, because I've had a lot of well-known white pastors call me confidentially. What can I do? Brother John. When I hear Brother John, I already know. Brother John, what can I do? And the first thing I'll say is, what would you want if somebody killed your son on TV? What would you want? The first thing you'd want is collective outrage. You'd want somebody to identify with your pain. The first thing we want is empathy. I don't want you to think, well, what did he do? Well, let me see the rest of the evidence. I don't need you trying to be a juror. You didn't get a jury duty notice. Somebody died on TV, and I need you to feel the humanity of the moment. Because regardless of what the potential crime was or the offense, it was not a death penalty offense. Let the process take its course. Some people need to go to jail, black and white. Some black people need to go to jail. But it's not your job to arrest, try, convict, and kill me on the sidewalk. Let the process play itself out. But the first thing, white pastors, is to have empathy. The second thing is for us as black people is to not paint all white people with the same brush, because every white person is not racist. Every white person is not prejudiced. And so we have to extend an olive branch that everybody's experience is different. How we were raised was different. But empathy goes a long way. And then the second thing is honor my pain. Honor my pain. I didn't say pay me for my pain yet, but honor my pain. And what I mean is don't be okay with me on your worship team and as your usher. And that's my pastor. I love my pastor, because black folk love their white pastors in certain subsections of culture. And that's a part of the neo-colonial system that we've been a part of, is that we just emphatically seem to trust white leadership, but we hold black leadership to a very different standard. But the idea is that I don't want to just be on your worship team. I'm not, if I'm good enough to be on your worship team and a volunteer and on your brochures, and my tithe is good enough, then put me at the table when it comes to policy decision, leadership, talks about theology, and how you include the understanding of the black and brown experience. If I'm 30 or 40% of your congregation, I also need to be a proportional part of your leadership. And if that conversation is not happening now, then I think people should rethink what it means to be a part of the local church. I think God supported the church because we hadn't been doing it the way he wanted it done. So white pastors, get rid of the Nicodemus spirit. Don't call me privately and then be silent publicly. Don't come to me, cry aloud and spare not, and say this is wrong, and it's wrong because it's wrong, not because it was a white cop and a black man. It was wrong if it would have been a black cop and a white woman, but it's wrong because it consistently happens to black and brown people, particularly black men. So say that. That's not racist. That's not race baiting. It's not expounding white guilt. White people shouldn't feel guilty for being white. Racists should feel convicted for being racist. This is not white people versus black. It's racism versus people who have humanity and empathy. I'm sorry for taking long.
That's okay. We appreciate you, and we're going to have to move to our next segment. But I want to thank you for taking our time because I know how busy you are, and I really appreciate you, my brother. And we will just continue this movement, and we will bring down racism once and for all. And it's going to be a lifelong process, and we will remain vigilant. We're not going to let up. As you said, we've given our life to this, and whatever that means, so be it. So God bless you. Yes.
I love you like cook food. And the next time I see you, dinner is on me at someplace expensive like Chili or Sonic.
All right. I love you too, my brother.
Have a good one, John. Love you. Bye-bye.
Wow. So we've had this faith talk tonight, and he stepped into the room about equity and leadership in white churches. And tonight we want to talk about we've talked about faith and race tonight, equity and justice, and now we're talking about equity in the corporate arena. And we have 3 corporate leaders that are joining us tonight. Many of you remember Botham Jean, the unarmed young man in Dallas, Texas, who was killed in his own apartment after Amber Geiger, who was an off-duty police officer, mistook him as a burglar. The CEO of the company that Botham Jean worked for is with us tonight. He's joining us. Tim Ryan is the chairman and senior partner at PwC, legally known as Price Waterhouse Coopers. Before I engage him, I want to bring on our other corporate leaders. We have Damon Jones, who has been named as the new Chief Communications Officer for Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble has partnered with us with our beloved Community Talks, and we're so grateful for Damon's leadership in that regard. And finally, the CEO of Kroger. Those of us in the southern states know Kroger very well. It's the second largest general retailer in the U.S. William Rodney McMullen is with us. So thank you all for joining us. We're just going to dive in. I want to ask Damon first, because Damon, you are a black man in corporate America in an executive role, and I'm sure sometimes you've had to walk gingerly as you've tried to bring things to the attention of corporate leaders like those that have joined us tonight. What is you all's role now as Black executives in many of these major corporations, in light of what we've now witnessed, which we've been witnessing forever?
Well, like I said, this is not new, and I think everyone on the on the stream now knows that it's not new. I've been fortunate to work with Rodney and Tim for some time in this fight, right? Because I think in each of our corporate roles, we recognize that this is not only something that happens beyond the office or beyond the store, it impacts what happens internally. So to answer your question, Dr. King, it starts with recognizing that we bring our whole self to work, right? That when you walk in, you don't leave, what you watch on the news at home when you come to work. And so I think for me, it is about continuing to ensure the level of awareness and engagement in these types of issues and what happens in corporate America. Number 2, that we become beacons for just understanding and discussion, right? Race has always been a hard and difficult thing for us to talk about. And when I first started at P&G 20 years ago, we were told, don't talk about politics and don't talk about, what's happening outside when you come to the office. You can't live that, right? I don't leave my Blackness at the door. It comes in with me. So I come in walking in my truth, walking in my power, and using that as an opportunity to make sure that business steps up to what it needs to do, right? This is a moment where business now more than ever can be a positive force for good. That means we're using our intellectual capital, we're using our bully pulpit, we're using our spending power to advance this. So our role is to keep the dialogue alive, to bring people along that journey, because if they're not listening to their pastor, they're not listening to their politician, they may listen to their boss, right? So when Rodney or Tim, says these are the values that of Kroger, these are the values of PwC, or these are the values of P&G, that's an opportunity to open minds and change hearts. So we have to take that, let people know who we are, where we stand, and to make sure that we're supporting the people that support us at the end of the day. as a Black leader, my voice is especially relevant now. Because people are listening, and it's important that we all, despite our pain or because of our pain that we're going through right now, we take that opportunity seriously and we use it as a moment to really be transformative.
And speaking of pain, I know Pastor John mentioned the importance of white pastors really being empathetic to the pain of Black community. And I know, Tim, when you all lost Botham Jean, who was an employee of your company, you stepped up to the plate and made a very serious commitment to prioritizing diversity and inclusion. Talk to us a little bit about that, and how does it change now in the face of what we are looking at with this outcry across America, where young people are not letting up on Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. King, and thank you for having me tonight. It's such an important conversation. On September 6, 2018, when Botham Jean was killed, our employee, sitting in his apartment by himself, and an armed officer shot him, it became personal for us. What many of our Black professionals told us is they were surprised that we were surprised. It hit home for us because it was one of our own. But what we heard from our Black professionals, thousands, was we shouldn't be surprised. And when I was listening to the pastor and you asked him, what can you do for white pastors? It's the same thing for white business leaders. We need to make it personal. We need to understand. And what we did, building off of the tremendous loss of Botham Jean, is we made it personal at our firm. We developed days of understanding. We gave permission, to Damon's point, gave permission to talk and to understand. We passionately believe before you jump to any program, culturally, you need to be able to talk about this. And if we're honest, race is the most uncomfortable topic to talk about in corporate America. And we need to make it okay to talk. We need to understand what it's like to be a Black parent and teach your teenage Black boy how to get pulled over by the police. We need to hear from our Black professionals that they carry a PwC business card with them in case they get pulled over. And when we begin that understanding, we then can be more empathetic. And we have really focused on driving what we call days of understanding. As you and I spoke the other day, we also worked with Damon and Rodney and hundreds of CEOs. We developed a group called CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, because we can do a lot inside the walls of PwC, but we also have to lead the business community together so we can all go on this journey together. We now have over 1,000 CEOs that represent over 20 million employees across the country, and we're trying to increase this understanding in corporate America so we can know the pain, so we can know the fear, so we can understand the anger. The reason this is so important now, if I look at my time as CEO, in 2016, we had shootings in Dallas. In 2017, we had Charlottesville. In 2018, we lost our Botham Jean. And here we are in 2020 with George Floyd. If we don't go after this, it's going to happen again. Our collective responsibility is to take every measure possible to make sure there's not a 2021 and a 2022.
And I appreciate what you're sharing with me. And we talked about this the other day, is that how do we ensure that corporations also move from the conversation to the action, to look at how our corporations may have inequities running throughout it, from the boardroom to supplier diversity. How do we shift and really make these changes? Because what I'm hearing from a lot of these young people is they want change. They're not just protesting to be out there doing a march or to pass time or to let off energy. They want real change that brings about justice and equity throughout America, which includes corporate America. So I want to ask Rodney, what is your perspective on that? And what does corporate America have to do now to really look at how to bring true equity into corporate America, not just contributing, which many corporations are doing now, and which is important to do, to the work of social justice organizations. I want to tell people while they're out there, don't forget the King Center, because we're doing important work of transforming lives to my father's nonviolent philosophy and methodology. But how do we get corporations to do the internal work, the hard work after the conversations?
for me, I love the question. And for all of our companies, diversity and inclusion has been something that's been a principle for us for years. But over the last couple of years, it's real. Each of us, we need to do more. And one of the things for each of us at Kroger, one of the things we're doing is stepping up and listening more, learning more, and taking more action. One of the things that one of our associate resource groups did, our African American ARG, put together an allyship guide that we've shared with everyone, because we all have to learn how to be better allies and helping. One of the things that we realized is that we have a great mentorship and sponsorship program, but it starts at middle level executives. We need to have that at all levels of our executives. But it's really, we all have to take action, and it's something that's been important for us for a long time, but it's time to step it up and take it to the next level.
And I know, Tim, you mentioned, because we had a very frank conversation, I think, the other day, because diversity inclusion has been the buzzword for the last several years in corporate America. And yet nothing has changed as it relates to Black people. In America, Black people still are at the bottom in every arena. There are great disparities. Pay equity is one thing. Black people are absent in our corporate boardrooms. They are absent in many of our corporate suites, or they're just a minimal amount. How do we ensure, while there's a look at the diversity and inclusion, that Black people, because you talk about a gap, can you say what you said to me the other day about this?
Yeah, absolutely. And so as a CEO and an executive like David and Rodney, we have many elements of diversity in our firm: gender, sexual orientation, and everybody needs to feel welcome, inclusion, and equality. But if we're honest, and this is what I said yesterday or the other day, the gap on Black is a mile wide in corporate America. I don't mean that with any disrespect to every other group, which everybody's important, but the gap on Black is a mile wide. And so what we need to do is we need to focus on important activities. And I agree with Rodney, understanding, but we need to step up and help ourselves to better outcomes as well. And so one of the things that we announced on Thursday at PwC, I could get defensive and tell you all the great things we've done, but we, as Rodney said, need to do more. We announced 2 major actions inside the firm. The first one is we're going to take our diversity inclusion strategic plan that we do every year that covers recruitment, advancement, pay equity, representation at every level, and we're going to make that transparent to our people. And we're going to go over it with them. We're going to talk about the steps, and we're going to talk about how well we did. And if we got there, we'll celebrate. If we didn't get there, we'll hold ourselves accountable and figure out why we didn't get there. We need transparency so we can understand where we're going. And as an employer of 55,000 people, we have to be willing to share that. The other bold move we announced, we have many employee resource groups. We announced we're creating a staff diversity. So you were talking about the people who are really rising up, the millennials. We're putting together a staff advisory council to look at, for them to tell us the actions we should take, as opposed to management deciding what actions we're going to take. Very different, letting the bottoms up really drive the firm and capture the spirit that's out there.
So let me ask this. This is going to be a tough question for everybody. How do we ensure that Black lives really matter in corporate America? And the reason I say that is because when we've had changes in America, take affirmative action, for example, it was white women who benefited more than Black Americans. And it was birthed out of the movement that my father led. It came on the heels of that. And yet every time, every other group goes up and the Black race stays down. This happens in corporate America. It happens in Hollywood. It happens in the health industry. It happens all across the board. So I guess my question is, what is the real promise and commitment to the Black community? And I know it's a delicate balance because you represent the globe, you represent the world house, as my father said. But I'm just afraid with where the temperature is in the Black community, if we don't see substantial changes in pay equity, if we don't see ourselves at the top making decisions and leading these corporations, not in sprinkle, but proportionate to who we are population-wise in this country, we may be right back here in a different kind of way.
Yeah, I think you have to. It starts with both transparency and accountability, right? So to Tim's point, as a consumer, we hold the brands accountable. Every time we purchase a product, if that's our product tied, we are voting with our dollars. So I think we're going to see a really tremendous movement on transparency from the consumers that we serve. I think we're going to see it from employees. Employees are not going to choose to work for a company that's not transparent, that's not making it. The second point that I would just drive is on where's the accountability. We have to hold leaders accountable throughout all parts of our business. I think one of the mistakes corporate America has made for far too long is making this the responsibility of a diversity and inclusion department. This is not the job of a diversity and inclusion department. If you've got a finance department, they need to be looking at financial equity, supplier diversity. Are we banking with black banks? If you're looking at an advertising department, they need to be looking at, are we spending with black media? Do we have black advertising agencies? Right? You can go department by department,
yes,
and it needs to hold business leaders accountable, and it can't be the job of a few people. And much like we've done at our company, I know Tim and others have done it, when you have your review, if you're going from level X to level Y, we need to be asking, what is your track record, right? And if you don't have a good answer, then you shouldn't be sitting in the C-suite. I think that's step one.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Damon and Tim both. Transparency, accountability is absolutely critical. We all are spending resources too, both with our own associates and also with suppliers. And last year we spent $3.4 billion with minority suppliers. That we can still do more. And I know we've been working with our teams to say, okay, how do we continue? Last year we grew at 12%. How can we continue to grow at double-digit rates with minority suppliers? All of those things, I think, together and being transparent about it will help everyone bring up to a higher level.
Yeah, Dr. King, I would just add to that. I agree with the points made. When we formed this group, CEO Action, we were very deliberate with the branding, and Damon's Procter & Gamble organization helped us tremendously with that. CEO and Action. I couldn't agree more with Damon. This has to start at the top. And one of the reasons we chose it is we need action. We don't need great speeches. We don't need great memos that say we're horrified. We condemn. We need action. And it starts at the top. One of the things that we have to push ourselves, a CEO would not go into a boardroom and say, that underperforming business in Asia, it's a journey. That equity gap that we have on our capital statement, we'll get that, it's a journey. We can't let diversity and inclusion be a journey. It needs to be fixed, and it needs to be addressed, and it needs to start at the top. And if the CEO can't go a mile deep explaining what they're doing on diversity and inclusion, then that's where we got to start to fix it first. And that's a big area we're working on.
Yeah, Dr. King, the one last point that I would just add to that is I think as we move along this continuum.
I'm gonna have to close out, unfortunately, because they're wrapping me up. So I wanted to thank you all for this conversation. Maybe we can have it again. Thank you for your input, and Rodney and Tim and Damon. And just remember, Black Lives Matter. When you're doing the diversity inclusion work really hard to make sure Black people come up equity-wise. So thank you all for the work that you are doing. And we're going to go to our next guest. Tonight. We thank these corporate leaders for being a voice and working with us. We want to bring in Pastor Otis Moss to kind of close us out. Reverend Dr. Otis Moss Sr. Will join us now, and I won't be able to interview him. But do you want me to wrap, or you want me to bring Otis Moss? I'm trying to get my cues from my producers. Dr. Otis Moss, I'm waiting for him to come in. Dr. Otis Moss, we have 2 minutes. 2 minutes. If we're not bringing him in, we may have to bring him in another night. It looks like we're going to have to close tonight. This has been a rich conversation. I wish we had more time to really keep pushing the issue because I want people to understand we live in a world house. It's not about any one race, but when there's a particular race that is struggling at the bottom and continues to be at the bottom, it is incumbent upon the rest of the people in the house to ensure that they bring their brothers and sisters up and that they're at the same level that the rest of the house is at. with the rest of those that reside in that house. So we're going to continue to move this nation toward justice and equity, because it's one thing to talk about racism. It's another thing to really work on eliminating those policies and those practices that manifest themselves in racial outcomes. And so that's what we're devoted here with the online protest, with the King Center, with our training. We want to invite you to sign up for our nonviolence training, which helps you to change the way you're thinking about things and how we approach things in a manner that we create win-win solutions, and that we are not destructive in our approach, but that we are constructive, because we all, yes, need to stand together and stand strong. Please join us on tomorrow night. Those in Georgia, don't forget to vote on Tuesday, June the 9th. And let us not forget to raise our voices for Breonna Taylor. Those officers need to be immediately arrested. Sign the petition to ban the chokehold. And please have a safe and please have a great night. God bless you all.